I can say this now that it's 20 years on. No one really starts in finance knowing what the hell they're doing or what they want to do.
Do you think that's a very important piece for people to take away with the aim of breaking into the finance industry?
Big time. This will sound awful, and I've had some trainers say they would never do this, but
Welcome back to Cutting Edge. So in today's podcast, we've got the pleasure of interviewing Gerard Kelly, one of our chief financial instructors at Financial Edge Training. So welcome, Gerard. So good to have you on board.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me.
So it'd be great if you could start by introducing yourself, telling us a bit about your background, and then we go from there.
Cool. Oh my God. So who am I? I'm obviously a trainer at Financial Edge, and I've been here since the beginning. But my background, so I started working at a company called Arthur Andersen. I worked in tax. However, they were the auditors to Enron, world's largest corporate scandal. So I had to move on from that job pretty quickly. And I went to work at EY in corporate finance. And then after a number of years there, went into training and I've moved around and eventually got to Financial Edge.
Fantastic. That is a very concise bullet speed summary.
I've tried, yeah. Normally when I'm teaching, I have to do all that really quickly, and then I have to get into 8 hours of teaching.
Yeah, well, definitely going to pick some of that apart.
It's the other way around this time, right? Okay. Yeah.
And so perhaps if we rewind as well to sort of your educational background before you started your first job, did you have any training or exposure in finance, accounting? What led you to ultimately getting that first job in tax?
Sure. So during my A-levels, I studied PPE, so politics, philosophy, economics. And it was the economics that really spurred my interest. My dad also had a job in finance, so I could talk to him a little bit about it. And then at university, I got into economics, studying it there. And I think I always knew I really wanted a job somewhere in finance. I wasn't quite sure that I was going to end up teaching finance, but things evolved, so yeah, that's how it happened.
Nice. And did you find yourself applying for full-time roles towards the end of university? Did you get exposure to any internships? I know that this has changed so much now with this rigorous application process, but what was it that instigated you submitting an application for your first job?
Sure. So I was going to have a gap year before university, and I did have a gap year before university. And there were some roles going, Arthur Andersen in tax. Do you want to work here for a year? Obviously, then wanting to go up and get a graduate role as well. So I got that, and I worked at Arthur Andersen for a year. And unfortunately, they then went up in smoke, and they're long gone now. But from there, while I was doing my university degree, I was applying for internships, knowing that internships were really the kind of crucial way to get into companies. So having worked for one of the big accountancy firms, I applied for another one of the big accountancy firms, so EY. And I got an internship there, but not in tax. It was now into corporate finance, so M&A, due diligence, that kind of thing. Had an absolute blast in a summer internship. I mainly worked in corporate restructuring, so dealing with companies in distress. And then eventually after university, got the graduate job as an analyst at EY, rotated around 4 different parts of the business. And it always happened without me having to try too hard. Like after working at Arthur Andersen in an accounting firm, it just kind of felt natural to apply to another one, and then got the job.
Of course. And then how did you make the switch from, say, tax to corporate finance? Was it just in terms of what was available at the time? Did you always have an interest to try out corporate finance because it's so different?
Yeah. This is going to sound awful, but I can say this now that it's 20 years on. So I worked in tax, and it was great, but it just wasn't for me.
Got it.
Just wasn't for me at all. So I applied to EY Corporate Finance because I did not want to be an accountant.
Okay.
And then I went along, and at the beginning you get some analysts come in just to say hi and chill you out before you go into the interview. And say, oh, why'd you apply here? I really don't want to be an accountant. And they said, everyone at EY has to be an accountant. So I really quickly had to rewrite my interview in my head and said how much I loved accountancy. And I am an accountant. I became an accountant and I worked there for years, but I was in M&A, so it was a completely different focus.
It must have helped having that background at Arthur Andersen in that tax and accounting going
into. It really did. Having any kind of finance job experience really helps. So even getting a couple of hours helps you get that first week, helps you get that next one, which is maybe a summer internship, and helps you get the final job in the end. So yeah, having a year at Arthur Andersen I imagine, looked pretty good on the the CV.
Yeah, and when you were at EY, so this was for a few years.
Yeah.
And you mentioned you started in the restructuring side of things. Is that where you remained throughout your time at EY?
So the way things worked at EY was really original. You went on a rotation through 4 different departments. So corporate restructuring was one, which I loved. M&A, due diligence, and project finance. So mainly working on things like the Olympics or redoing bridges or nuclear power stations, that kind of thing. And I loved my time in all of them. Then you got to pick which one you wanted to specialise in. And I picked project finance and spent time working on railways and military stuff and the Olympics. Yeah, it was really good fun.
Oh, nice. So definitely like an infrastructure focus.
Yeah, very much infrastructure focus.
Any particular favourite projects there?
It's got to be the Olympics, the London Olympics. Like, you have to remember, when I was working there, it was still a long time before the London Olympics. It was many years ago now. But we were helping companies and the government rebuild the Olympic Park. So choosing the electricity provider and then helping the electricity provider dig the whole place up. And so that was one that I particularly worked on. And that was awesome, getting access to like LOCOG, the London Olympic Organising Committee. I worked on that for an awful long time. That was great.
That must have, the due diligence and managing all the various parties and contractors must have been a lot at the time.
It was weird because I thought I was a small cog in a big company, but we, EY, were a small cog in this enormous operation, and there were so many other people making decisions that instead of us just being the advisors to the client, we were one of many, many, many advisors to the client.
And actually, a lot of our listeners will be thinking project finance. That's funny because we hear a lot about M&A, ECM, DCM, but project finance. And it's so interesting because you look at some of these massive stadiums, you look at Stratford and the redevelopment, and the question is, well, how on earth has that been financed? And the answer is project finance. And it's such an interesting area. And to those listening who don't really know too much about project finance, could you give a very brief summary of what is project finance, why is it interesting, why people could potentially consider this as a future finance career?
Yeah, sure. So the classic M&A is one company buying another company. You're trying to appraise that company. Do I want to buy it? If you do want to buy it, how do I value it? And then if I decide I want to buy it, then how do you put the two together? And project finance is completely different. Project finance is you're looking at a discrete project, like building a stadium, which then we need to finance that. Then we need to get our money back from it. But quite often you won't end up owning it at the end, or there'll be a decision that it will be owned maybe by the government after 30 years or 40 years or something like that. So it's much more of a discrete period you're looking at, rather than outright ownership and shares and do we sell it on at the end? It's more investment and then returns. So in many ways, it's quite similar to M&A, and it's also quite similar to leverage buyouts, but it is just that little bit different. The nice thing is you move on from project to project to project, and you get to see them making really large changes in the economy.
Absolutely. And then in terms of these projects, they're much longer term, I presume, and you're looking at things with a fairly steady cash flow relative to these other big companies which we see M&A in most news headlines. And I presume the focus here is on debt serviceability to be able to pay down that project finance, or how have you seen that?
You've said it exactly right. Another one that I worked on was where the government were trying to find private companies to run certain rail lines. So like not Crossrail, but like Virgin Cross Country, and that's moved on to other companies now, where a private company is saying, look, how much money can I earn from this? How much can I charge customers? How much am I going to pay the staff and pensions? And you've got to make sure that everyone's being treated fairly, because you can't just charge people £1,000 to go to Manchester. It'd be absolutely criminal. So the government have quite a lot of restrictions on what a company can do, and then the company has to decide whether they can actually make it work. And then there's the issue of whether there's going to be some subsidy from the government, and if they make super profits, are the profits going to be given back to the government? There's so many more moving parts. It does become quite interesting.
And this is where you're factoring this into a model, all these different scenarios and the impact of having that subsidy or not, and then what you present to the client.
Exactly. And there's a lot more operating model that goes on there as well, particularly with the staff and the pensions. Can you afford to pay people into these pensions for many, many years? And this will sound absolutely crazy, but with the trains, you have to assess whether the company who wants to do it can make all the train times run on time. Now, I'm going to be honest, that wasn't part of my job. That was someone else with a much higher salary than me.
The logistics of all of that as well.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
that's super interesting. And then, so you spent this time within the infrastructure, advisory, project finance based role. And then from that point, did you pivot towards financial training? And how and why did you make the decision?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think I'd always known that I'd love teaching. I'd spent 6 months teaching in Belize and had an absolute ball, like teaching primary and secondary school kids. And then got into some training at EY and helping training people internally. But I think I always loved it. So I went and spoke to the people who trained me at a company called BPP. And they said, yeah, come along, do a demo and see if you get a job. And all of a sudden had a job. And I had to go in and had quite intense training at the beginning. And then they unleashed me at teaching accountancy. So I was teaching accountancy qualifications then, teaching people to be accountants. And I worked there for 5 years.
Wow. And were you required to have any existing qualifications like the ACA, CFA, or any of these?
Yeah. So at that time, certainly I had to be an accountant to teach accountancy. So I'm a chartered accountant of Scotland. So that was absolutely fine. I also then became a CFA, so Chartered Financial Analyst program, or Chartered Financial Analyst, charter holder. And then I started teaching that as well. So yeah, they very much like you to do the qualification first.
I see. And when these accountants come on board, you're teaching them for the purposes of gaining the qualification.
Yeah, so very syllabus based. You might be teaching them towards their financial management exam, take them through the academics, then the real world, then question practice, and hopefully get some emails from them telling you that they've passed.
Yeah, and the training programs that you would offer, how does teaching these compare to being on a deal and actually running with the project financing of a big infrastructure project? What are the main differences going from working in finance to teaching finance?
Yeah, sure. It's quite different, I will admit. So when you're on a deal, everything is always new. The company is always new. The process is always new. It's always different. And the variety is amazing, obviously. Teaching, the only other thing, though, is as the actual worker, you're quite often sat at a desk quietly just working. And obviously long hours and good pay. Teaching is exactly the opposite. You get to teach quite similar things most of the time, so there's perhaps less variety. But you get to meet different people every single day. And the variety for me was the people you meet in the classroom. You meet the odd class clown and the odd quiet person, and the people who are really shy but just desperate to do well. And I love it. I love chatting to people. I could talk all day long. And if we have the time, I will talk to you for the next 10 hours. So sitting quietly at a desk wasn't really me. I was always going to be chatting to people.
And did you know that? I mean, if you spent that many years at EY and you clearly enjoyed it and you have good memories, was it just something that you realized upon giving teaching a go? Or did you always know that teaching was going to be for you?
I think I'd always probably known. Yeah. So I did a little bit at sixth form and go to the local primary school and help them out. And then my gap year went to Belize and taught for 6 months. I think I'd always known, but I really wanted a job in finance. I went and did that first and then pivoted it towards financial training. And two worlds collided.
It's such a good stepping stone, isn't it? Having been there in the industry to then go and take your own experience coupled with like that financial knowledge to then teach students.
Exactly. And actually, I could probably throw the same questions back to you. Like you've got a finance background and now you pivoted. And I think no one really starts in finance knowing what the hell they're doing or what they want to do. And after a couple of years, you probably realise, I like this and I don't like that. And how can I just maximise the bit that I enjoy? And training's worked really well. And so I started teaching accountancy, and technically I'm an accountant, but I've never actually done an audit or things like that. But then someone said, hey, do you want to come and teach corporate finance? Oh my God, yeah, that's exactly what I used to do. And they said, it's not syllabus based. You're going to actually teach people how to do their job on their desk. I was like, oh my God, well, that's what I used to do. This is fantastic. So it's just kind of got better and better and better as the years go on.
There seems to be so many cases of people starting in finance, like you say, not 100% certain of what they want to do in the long term, but so many options just come up and they end up in some shape or form either leaving to a different company, doing something similar, doing something completely different altogether. There's so many different exit options, as people like to call it.
This is it.
And actually now, especially with younger workers joining, we're seeing people leave the industry altogether after 2-3 years, and less people staying long term at some banks and some institutions. And actually the amount of opportunities now in content creation, in social media entrepreneurship, it really opens up the door. But having said that, having your feet in finance for the first year, 2 years out of university teaches you a lot. Big open world, working for big companies, get your financial literacy up to speed. And in that case, it's paid off.
Yeah, exactly. So from my kind of cohort that started at EY, one person went to work at Tesco's afterwards. She became a store manager and then financial manager and financial director. Lots of people went to work in banks. One person went to work for a private family, helping them invest their wealth. Other people went into derivatives. One person went into trading. One person set up his own hair salon.
Nice.
And created all these fantastic products. And it was the products rather than the salon that went and was a big seller. And he made a lot of money from that. So it's a great grounding. But of course, you end up doing what you want to enjoy.
Yeah, and that's the other point, is the network. Do you find yourself still in touch with the people who you've worked with in the past or who you were teaching with?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Often asked to go along and do chats, talk to people about, my experiences over the years and particularly how training can help them. There's one guy who I started with and he's now looking to become a trainer, and he's looking to do banking and training. And I imagine he's thinking about work-life balance and maybe moving around the world. And so he's looking to be a trainer. Oh my God, wow, this has come full circle.
Yeah, and speaking of training, you said at BPP.
Yep.
And then from that point, did you then move to another company? What was the evolution of you from one financial training company to another?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a trainer at BPP who left to join another company called AMT. And he gave me a ring, say, hey, do you want to come along, meet the MD? And I thought it was just a beer, but it wasn't a beer at all. Everyone was like very formally dressed, and it was basically an interview. And they said, well, this all sounds great. We'll get you to do a demo tomorrow. If that goes well, we really need a decision by the end of tomorrow whether you want the job. And I was like, oh my God, wow.
Intense.
This is really intense. I need a little bit more time than this. I want to chat to my wife. But it all ended up really, really good. So I worked there for 2.5 years. And then someone said, hey, do you want to come to Financial Edge? And Financial Edge was a little startup. Do you want to come along and help set it up? And I said, that sounds amazing. And there were, I think, about 20 of us there on day one.
Oh, wow. And when was this? What year or how many years?
So that was at the start of 2016.
Got it.
Back January 2016. So crikey, I'm very old now. And it's just grown and grown and grown. I think we're at, I don't even want to quote numbers, but we're at multiples of that staff now. Yeah. And lots of clients. It's going really well.
That must have been great to compare, I guess, these big established training companies with this startup culture, Financial Edge, and seeing how that's grown enormously.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you one thing we all decided at the start was we're just going to spend like 3 to 6 months just coming up with all the materials that we want, rather than, work with materials that have been made by someone else in the past, which again, all good. But how would I do it if I was starting afresh? So that was amazing. It was really, really intense. And then you get a client say, hey, I want a course. And we say, oh my God, we haven't got any materials for that. So everyone's creating materials just like crazy. And then we got into the classroom, and then and now it's just years. The years have flown by, and we are teaching so many days now, it's insane.
And it's classroom training for existing banks, investment banks, finance institutions, and also online courses now which people can access.
Exactly. So we do the classroom, we do obviously virtual like webinars, and then the online courses. But then we've also got other things as well, like Felix and data that I'm not quite so close to myself. But yeah, definitely all the teaching.
Got it. It must have been quite refreshing doing that reset of content and going, well, hey, we can do this from scratch. How would we build this? And did you find you were doing anything different to what others had been doing in terms of the types of exercises, how you'd go about teaching? What stood out?
There was definitely a thing where we were asking ourselves, how could we be different? So we were trying to get really high-end recordings, very similar to this, I must say. But the other thing, I had something on the tip of my tongue that I was going to say to you about how we were doing things different. It really I didn't appreciate how materials were constructed and how I was teaching until I had to construct them myself. Okay. So, for instance, I might teach like 10 different questions, and I wouldn't realize that each question really had a different key learning point, but only one key learning point per new question. So when you're creating these new materials and you now know everything, you want to put it all into the first question. Oh, hang on, no. You've got to split it all up, just gradually build people up, have questions that repeat the same learning point. So that really taught me something about how I taught. I hadn't kind of really thought about it consciously. It had all just been subconsciously happening in the background.
It helped you to reflect on what was the best way for you to teach.
Great word.
Right.
Yeah. Good reflection.
It's interesting. And then have you been with when you were teaching with BPP and then AMT, I presume at first those were much bigger classrooms, and then when you started with Financial Edge, you'd build up to where it is now?
No. So when we started Financial Edge, we had a few customers, and so all the big training happens over the summer, and those classrooms were hundreds of people. So it was quite similar, but we teach everything from 1-to-1 up to rooms of 500 plus, and we had all that in the first year. So
wow,
yeah,
going from creating the content to teaching it within the space of a year.
The really interesting thing was when students would read a question and find ambiguity in it. I'd be like, oh my god, how? Oh, we just never obviously haven't tested it in a classroom before. So the next year was quietly rewriting everything to make sure all that ambiguity was gone.
And that's how it works, is sort of testing the market. Hey, how is this being received? How can we improve it? And just going in that feedback loop.
I heard this great story from years gone by about a trainer who came up with all this material and then took it out and taught it to a room of hundreds and just had a big stack of dollar bills and said, right, for everyone who finds a brand new glitch in the materials, you get a dollar bill. And so all his materials within 2 weeks got glitch fixed, fantastic, done, and it cost him $100.
Yeah.
Wow, what a way to do it.
What an approach, exactly.
Yeah, and of course, people who are motivated by earning a couple of bucks, it's not really the money, it's I think the competition of beating your neighbours.
Yeah, and the idea of actively seeking feedback, because ultimately you're offering a product and service, and by constantly innovating, constantly improving it, that's how you stay on top. That's how people keep coming back to your products. That's how they keep coming back to your training, and actually word of mouth gets around. Hey, I was just taught by Financial Edge or whatnot.
That's exactly it. That's it. So we've been running for many years now, since 2016, and the weird thing we're finding is that rather than going out and winning all the big clients, which we've done, is lots of the people we taught as analysts back in 2016, 17, 18 have now joined other smaller companies, little M&A boutiques, something completely different. And they've got recruits and they say, oh, well, my recruits of 5 or 20, they need teaching. So we're picking up lots of people there as well. And that really is just word of mouth, just them remembering their own experience.
And there's just finite amount of instructors out there and an increasing client base, so you're finding yourselves increasingly taking on more clients, more work, and so you can see why it's expanding so rapidly.
Exactly, and there's less time for me to do things like this. Like I'm not sure if I should be saying this, but we're here on a Friday night. It's the only time that instructors have any time.
Absolutely, just a bit of a different scene for you, I can imagine, from teaching.
Oh, I love it. No, this is lovely. This is lovely.
It's great. And then speaking of financial training and yourself as a trainer, what do you think are the key characteristics to be a great trainer? Apart from the being patient, being able to explain things clearly, are there any other aspects that you didn't expect that have come in handy?
Yeah, so I've had some students have very kindly say, oh yeah, you really like the way you teach, and I'll ask them, what is it? And they'll often look at me a bit dumbfounded and trying to work out what it is. But I had one student say that I make it sound really easy, so break it down really, really crazy simple, and then I don't patronize them. And I think that's what all trainers are. I'm saying I don't patronize. All great trainers won't patronize them. They won't act as if I know everything and you don't. They'll act as I used to not know it myself, but you guys will very soon know more than me and be teaching me how to do things. And I think that people like that. People like being taught by someone who they feel is on a similar level to them.
That's a great point, because actually teaching them the content is only half the story. It's how you teach it, how you talk to them, how you engage them and keep their interest. Yeah. That's the battle.
The other thing is try and make it fun, obviously. Yeah. So This will sound awful, and I've had some trainers say they would never do this, but I just pick on people left, right, and centre. And after the first half an hour, everyone gets, everyone's going to be picked on. It doesn't matter if you've got no idea. If you just want to say, I'm sorry, I have no idea, it's absolutely fine. And everyone gets it. And for the next couple of days, everyone's fine with being picked on and getting it wrong. And it's so allowable. And then it becomes a bit more fun, a bit more interactive, and keep people awake.
You're setting expectations from the get-go, and it's not picking on people to humiliate them in front of the class.
Never.
Because then that gives way to people, well, hang on, if we're chiming in, it's a bit more interactive anyway, rather than sit down with my notebook, say nothing, and then lose interest after an hour, 2 hours.
People will stare out the window if they're not going to be if they're not going to do some talking. So yeah, get them talking.
Do you find actually, over the years, especially with things like social media, TikTok, Instagram, and we know that people's attention spans are getting worse and shorter over time. Do you find that that's becoming more of an issue? Have you seen that obviously in a lot of banks and financial institutions, there's a very high standard, especially with learning and passing qualifications, things like the CISI exam for bankers. Do you find, and have you seen this becoming more of a problem, or has there been a consistent standard across the years for students?
I'm going to say there's a consistent standard. I think the people that we tend to teach are all of a very high standard anyway. Their ability to get distracted is, of course, the same as anyone else's, but everyone puts their heads down and they're all hugely motivated because they start their first ever job.
Yeah.
So everyone wants to put their heads down, and if it's CISI and they're taking another year or two to get their exams done. I don't think there's been an issue for me in that segment of the market. But of course, across the whole world of education and all the population, I'm sure there have been some changes that I haven't seen.
And that will also prompt things with online educational resources to how do we make this more gamified or shorter form content? Absolutely. And the case that once you've got your foot in the door in a bank, you're going to be naturally going out of your way to pay attention to succeed because you're there, you're through the front door. And for those who haven't, it's how do you position yourself and how do you make the most out of online e-learning without having access to that level of teaching?
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing that I have seen change is that rather than people saying, hey, can I have 3 hours on leverage buyout? They'll say, what do I need to know to do my job in leverage buyout? And I'll say, I think there's 10 things. And they'll look down it and they'll say, I want 5 of them. And you just teach them that 5. So people are time poor and people don't want to go through a great big academic exercise and really understand the nitty gritty and the 5 other things that aren't anything to do with my job. Literally just tell me what I need to know. But that's true of time poor people everywhere.
Absolutely. And then there's always be people, especially when they're asking for a training program for Financial Edge, like a 1-week intensive course, where it's tough as a trainer picking the best parts. And do you prioritize accounting or valuation, which parts of it? So have you found that tricky at times?
Yeah, absolutely. It can be tricky. When you're teaching one-to-one, that's the most amazing experience ever because you can ebb and flow. You can go as slow as someone needs in one section because they don't get it. You can skip over things that they do get. They can bring their own experience, and it's one-to-one's fantastic. But as soon as you go to 2-to-1 and up, you now have to find a middle road for the group. So whenever we're teaching a group of more than about 30, we always have teaching assistants who can take off 1 or 2 people who are finding maybe 1 half an hour section. That little bit harder. Right, let's go for a little bit slow with you guys and just quick, do a small little group while maybe Gerard teaches the other, 28 of them or so. So that really, really, really helps an awful lot to try and keep everyone vaguely together.
And we touched on the difficulty. So what are the challenges of trying to teach a big classroom?
The challenges of teaching a big classroom is keeping everyone engaged. So if I'm trying to be interactive with a group of 250, I will pick on every single person, but they're only going to be picked on 1 in every 250 questions. So that can be tricky. You break people into groups and you pick on groups, so that helps out a little bit. But yeah, keeping engagement high in a group of 250 plus, that is hard.
And what advice would you give to those who have just started or will shortly start a financial training program? They're just going to start their entry-level job and they're going into this 4-week, 6-week training program. What are some top tips? How can they get the most out of it? How can they get ahead of the curve when they hit the ground running with that?
Okay, if there's any kind of pre-course learning available, do it. And if you can, do it twice. everyone looks at all this pre-course stuff and they look at the headings, they go, I know that. Financial maths, how hard can it be? But when we teach you in the classroom, it really is very, very, very fast paced. And we don't have the time to really understand it and really get under the skin. Whereas at university, you have so much time to really understand it and read books and have seminars on one little point. But I've had a lot of people say to me, oh my God, you just taught me my degree in 3 hours. And it's that quick. So if there's a pre-course available, maybe some online videos or reading, and it says this will take you 2 days, give yourself 4. Give yourself 4 days, do it twice, Google the stuff you don't understand, and when you get to the classroom, you'll be so much better prepared. And you'll be able to keep up and you'll be able to ask questions, and give yourself more time.
Because it's just as important to be applying the knowledge as having learnt it in the first place. And you probably feel less under pressure to be keeping up with the content and the pace of the classroom if you have such a good broad understanding going into it.
This is exactly it. So a really good example is where you're trying to model a set of accounts. So financial modeling in Excel, and you're trying to build an income statement, balance sheet and cash flow. And you're trying to remember everything about an income statement, balance sheet and cash flow. And you're trying to do Excel shortcuts at the same time. And if all of that is new, which for many people is, but if all of that is new, it's just that bit harder.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas if you got a slightly stronger grounding in accounting because you had a day of pre-course learning, then it'll just be that bit easier. Picking up the Excel shortcuts is that little bit easier. And everyone likes Excel shortcuts because they look cool. All right, so we want to learn them, but also get the accounting as well.
It saves time and everyone's happy.
Exactly. It saves time, less time at work, go out, hit the clubs, whatever it may be.
Yeah, as bankers do, I'm sure.
Need to blow off some steam.
And actually, speaking of when we are looking at students, they've just done their first training program, you've taught them. Do you think that, especially in areas like investment banking, they need constant retraining, say once a year, to polish up their skills? I mean, there's a huge degree of learning on the job, and you're just given an Excel model, you have to run with it as part of an ongoing live execution. But do you find it's helpful to have these annual, semi-annual training sessions more formally, as opposed to people doing it and learning off their own back? And do you think there's a risk of bad habits if they don't?
I think there's an awful lot of learning off your own back and Googling and asking your neighbour and colleague and boss at work. And that is amazing because you learn how to do your job. But I'd say after 6 months and 12 months, it is supremely useful to have someone come along and say, hey, what are the things that you're not understanding about your job? So maybe LBO, complex modelling, stub periods or something like that. And then just give you a couple of hours, just 90 minutes even, on just this is how it works. This is the best practice. And then you can go back to your boss and ask, hey, is that how we do it? Why is it different? And it's really useful just to have those little check-ins. So that helps you do the job that you're doing. I know lots of people like to have general refreshers. So a general refresher in Excel and financial modeling is really popular. I've forgotten most of my shortcuts. Can you just take me through for a few hours? And because they've got all the accounting now, they've got all the modeling now, they can just focus on the shortcuts. So we see an awful lot of that in the year afterwards as well. And
especially in, say, investment banking, you have this focus on an analyst and associates are the ones who run with the model. The vice president will usually take a look, oversee, check it, say this is how it needs to be done. But ultimately, the most senior people in the deal team won't really be as hands-on with the financial model. So there's a huge impetus and responsibility for the juniors to get that right in the first place. And I guess that's where the financial training more consistently comes in handy, because then you're keeping your tools sharp to know hang on, these are the best practices in Excel. This is how I'm going to sensitize the data, and I'm going to avoid doing any manual mistakes that could cost a lot of time. Yeah. And do you find that actually the more people who touch an Excel model, or the more people involved in exercise, the higher the likelihood of something going wrong? Or do you find that the more eyes, the better?
Personally, more eyes, the better. And in your first year, often you'll be given a model to work on, but then your boss will check it. And then you'll do a bit more and your boss will check it. And the same with slides. As soon as you're writing a slide, your boss will check it, often with a big fat red pen. It'll be covered in pen, comes back, and it just gets better every time. A big thing that I hear from a lot of analysts at the end of their first year, when they're talking to people just about to start their first year, is how much responsibility they were given, and they found it to be insanely high. So you're going to be put in at the deep end. You're going to have to own this slide deck or this model or this process through the M&A. How on earth are we going to do that? And of course, the better your training is, the safer you'll feel and the more responsibility you'll be able to take on. And that then gives you more responsibility through harder jobs. Your boss will be more impressed, more likely to get promoted, more likely to progress. Responsibility is just such a big part of investment banking. And if you can get yourself as strong as you can from the beginning, you'll be able to take on more and more.
And did you find when you started corporate finance, it was a huge amount of responsibility and you go, oh my word, I had no idea to expect this level of in the know with the pitch books or the presentations, the Excel models. Was it all a bit much at first and did you get quickly used to it?
It was a big old shock, absolutely. I think when you're at university, you're used to someone else leading and someone else giving you the answers. Whereas now when you're at work, you need to present your findings to the boss and then the boss will go speak to the client and it'll be your thoughts that are then being said. Obviously, the boss will have their own thoughts. So that was a big old shock. But of course, you very quickly get used to it. That's the whole point. And you've got a boss to help you out as well. So.
Absolutely. And so have you got any funny stories where you were a junior analyst, you're quickly learning the grips of something with a very tight deadline and that's caused a few concerns, any drama, any like late nights?
There's one story that comes to mind. So we were presenting to a client to try and win a job. So don't want to name any names, but it was in the kind of broadband market. Mm-hmm. And we were trying to become their advisor. So we were doing a practice presentation and the partners doing the presenting and the assistant directors helping out. And then they asked everyone, what do you think? And I said, well, this is happening in South America and none of us in this room are from South America, have any experience in any South American deal, whereas all the other advisors have got loads. And the room just suddenly stopped. And I thought, oh my God, I've said entirely the wrong thing and I'm going to get told off. And the assistant director went, oh my God, that is a brilliant, brilliant point. And by the end of the day, we had two people from the South American office booked to fly over on Monday morning. And I'm sure they were absolutely gutted.
Oh, wow.
Because they're now having to spend the next week here. And unfortunately, we didn't win the deal, so we put all this effort in. But that was just a one-off where I thought I'd done something wrong, but luckily it
You
turned out to
assumed
be
managing director's responsibility all of a sudden of staffing the right team.
I definitely wouldn't say that. No, I wouldn't say that. No.
Oh, great. That's really useful to know. And actually, now having gone through financial edge training and your financial training experience and going through corporate finance and your time before in the industry, what are some key takeaways? And from the perspective of people listening, they might want a job in finance. What is it that you've enjoyed so much about it to people listening might also want to follow a similar path?
Oh, wow. What have I enjoyed most about it? I think the idea that you get responsibility on deals that are actually going to make a bit of a difference. That's what's really cool. In terms of like tips I'd give people, you don't have to be on like an investment banking course. You don't have to be at the very best business school, but you do have to show some kind of interest and enthusiasm for finance. So you might be doing a non-banking related degree, I don't know, engineering, but you can't just turn up at an interview, literally no idea what the hell a bank does. Yeah. So show your interest. Maybe it'll be in doing your own like online course. Maybe you'll join a society. If you can just show some kind of enthusiasm for finance, that's going to be awesome. Also, any kind of work experience at all, whether it's office-based or ideally in finance, but something office-based is really going to help. But after that, banks want a more rounded person because everyone's got good results, and everyone's got a good university and everyone's got that. So what they're looking for people with a bit of leadership, maybe. Maybe you're the head of the finance society, or I'm going to tell you what my qualities were. So I was the chair of the dance society.
Oh, nice.
So dancing, chair of the musical society, and the treasurer of the drama society.
Oh, wow.
None of them are anything related to finance, but I could talk for hours about, arguments and how we resolved it and working in the team and trying to lead one deal and then having to pull back and let someone else lead on another. And it's those skills that banks really want, because it shows that you're a self-starter and you can work in a team and you can actually get a deal done. And anything like that at all, even if it's not finance related, then just do it. And it shows you're not just someone who's got good results.
And it sets you apart from becoming, or running the risk of being a corporate drone and doing your technical interview, getting 10 out of 10 marks for all the questions right, knowing everything to know about finance, but actually not have anything beyond that, and actually not having done any leadership experience, whether that's a chairman of some finance society at university, or even if you're in a sports related society and you can be treasurer. There's all these things you can do. And do you think that's a very important piece for people to take away with the aim of breaking into the finance industry?
Big time. So I once noticed I had a lot of people who had done American football in my classroom. And I started talking to another trainer about what is it? Because I'm not American, I'm not really that familiar with American football. And he said, well, have a think. Hang on, these guys have to get up at 5 a.m. They have to be at training at 5:30. These guys will work supremely hard away from the football field as well as on the football field. They have to work in a team. I thought, wow. And I'd never really reflected on the fact that a sports team can give you so many good characteristics to go to then hit the world of work. So it doesn't have to be drama or finance or football, or it can be absolutely anything. But just try to show that you're not just good grades, because everyone's got good grades.
Sure. And in a way, you can reflect that on your CV towards the end in your interests and activities. I guess the real $1 million question is interviews and interview tips and practice. And everyone always loves these golden tips. And actually, how do you portray that you have these outside skills and these outside interests in an interview, but keeping it relevant and to the point? Because if someone says, tell me about yourself, you obviously want to keep that succinct and say, hi, my name is Gerard. I come from a corporate finance background. I'm recently a financial trainer. But at what point, what kind of questions can you slide those? Oh, well, I'm actually leader of the dance society.
Yeah, absolutely. The kind of questions are, can you tell me an instance when? A strength or a weakness or a challenge or an argument, or you've got enormous ability to tell your stories then. And you don't even have to use buzzwords like, I displayed leadership. You can just tell a story which illustrates leadership without ramming it down the interviewer's throat. And I think that's quite nice, because if you can display leadership without saying the word leadership, then you're almost allowing the interviewer to complete the story in their head. And it's a bit like watching an amazing film, when the film kind of leaves it hanging.
Yes.
And you're like, oh my God, what happens? Did they? Don't they? Oh, I don't know how I feel about that. And it challenges the interviewer, it challenges the watcher. And you can do a little bit of that in your interview as well.
And also, that storytelling is so much more engaging to interviewers who are doing hundreds potentially over the course of weeks. If when they ask you, tell me about your strengths or weaknesses, or tell me about a time when you led, talking about how you led a rugby team in the midst of a extremely brutal competition and it was pouring with rain and actually you banded together. I mean, if you can really pull that across in an entertaining way by hitting the classic situation, task, action, result format, and still building your financial expertise across other questions, it can be something where they remember you by, particularly if they have a leaning interest towards whatever it is that you mentioned.
Exactly, absolutely. The other thing I also say is be interested in what you're talking about. So you hear so many people who join the finance society and they'll end up being the derivatives trader. But they have no idea what derivative is and they're not interested in it. And if they talk about it in an interview, they just won't be interesting.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're into ballet and you love ballet or music, I was into musicals, and we put on this enormous musical show, I could talk about it for hours and I could tell you the stories and the arguments and the different characters, and I can add colour to it. I can make it interesting. And that will stick in someone's head.
To me, there are two takeaways. The one, talk about things that genuinely interest you, especially in your answer interview. And even then, find interesting things about finance or the position that you're applying to. Because if you have an inherent interest in whatever it is you're going for, the chances of you actually showing that in an interview is far greater,
exactly.
Right?
Like two classic questions you'll get are, why do you want to work in finance? And why do you want to work for this company? Or why do you want to work in this position?
Yeah.
And if you just say, I want to earn a lot of money, that could be working anywhere. But if you show that I know what finance is, I know everything about this, maybe bank, for instance, and I know everything about this position, it kind of looks like, oh my God, this person's been dreaming about this job since they were born. I really want that person on my team.
I agree. I think those little KPIs, those USPs of the bank itself, is it up and coming? Does it have a different geographic presence? Those
exactly.
bits.
Like, if you can start talking about the deals that they've been involved in, try not to talk about the negatives. You know, if there's been some random part of the bank in some region that's had a penalty, maybe don't bring that up. You know, if they bring it up, then fantastic. Show that you know about it. But show that you've done loads and loads. Basically, show that you've been dreaming about this job at this bank or institution forever, and they won't be able to push you away.
Those deals are a great one because it shows not only you keeping up to date with the latest developments, but actually you can comment on it, give your feedback, give your input, understand the reasons why they went ahead without them telling you about it. And actually what I found useful is reaching out to alumni at my old university who'd maybe gone through a deal with Santander years ago when this was announced and it was public, and you'd read the press release and you go, oh, that's interesting. And then they go, oh, well, actually, have you thought about X, Y, Z? Have a think going into an interview. If you want to talk about this, what were the reasons? Why does it make sense for us? And actually, that going into an interview, I can imagine, can be quite powerful. And have you been as an interviewer? Have you seen things like this?
Absolutely. Really, really good is when you have people who I might ask you, what do you know about the bank? And you start telling me all about the bank and all about the deals and everything. And actually, you'll touch on something that I know about. And I can start having a conversation with you about the deal, and I can teach you a bit about the deal. And it just ebbs and flows. It's very natural. The very, very best interviews are where you have such a great chat. At the end, you ask them, do you have any questions? And they genuinely don't, because all the questions have come out during the interview. However, that is the very, very, very best interview. When you are asked, do you have any questions? Have some questions lined up.
Yes.
Have them ready. And if they've already come out during the interview, then that'll be absolutely fine.
Because I have heard that so many times that a good interview feels more like a conversation than it does a back and forth. Having said that, especially in some sectors, there is a very black and white, tell me about yourself, then behavioural competency questions, followed by technicals, followed by thank you, farewell. Yeah. But having said that, is there anything we can do to spin it around a little bit and to making it slightly more engaging?
I think always having stories about yourself. So going back to the things that just add colour, things that you're interested in, if it's drama or dance or rugby or American football or whatever, it doesn't have to be crazy. But if you can talk animatedly about something that engages you, they will get that. It will rub off. But things I've heard people do is people go in with jokes planned. Whoa, no. Just read the room and just have a chat. Don't script your jokes. I've had one person said they went in wearing all brown, all the exact same colour of brown. So their shirt and their tie and their belt, and they all exactly matched. Wow. Who wants to be remembered in a bank for what they wore? That maybe if you were trying to join a fashion house, but no, in a bank it's what you say and how hard you can work. Don't be remembered for what you wore. Be remembered for everything else, but not what you wore.
Yeah, especially in London where there is unspoken rule of no brown in town. I'm sure he was shown the door.
I'm wearing brown shoes right now. But exactly, it's be remembered for being an engaging person who I would want to have you on your team. I want you on my team, excuse me. That's, be remembered for what you say. Yeah, don't script it.
Yeah, and the scripting for me as well, you see that a lot now, especially with virtual interviews where you have these FAQs that come up. You can prepare and go, oh, well, I know they're going to ask me something about a technical question. I know they're going to ask me about my background and CV. It's a fine line, isn't it, between having a format ready to go and actually just rehearsing an answer that you're just repeating on screen.
Yeah, pardon me, I do mean prepare.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like go through there are lists and lists of questions online. Go through them. Have a think about your strengths and your weaknesses, and have a think about the economy and the bank and the position and the department. Have a think about all of that, definitely. Because when someone asks you, what are your strengths? You want to be able to say it. What are your weaknesses? You want to be able to say it. You want to show that you've reflected on your weaknesses and how you can change it to a positive and how you deal with it and how you show your own restrictions on those weaknesses. So preparation, yes, absolutely. But trying to go with like little quips, joke. Like someone said to me, they asked the interviewer, "Can you tell me a joke?"
No.
And the interviewer said, "No, I can't." And of course, the interesting thing, I'm a really busy person and this is a huge distraction from my day. Yeah. What are you doing wasting my time?
How odd. I can't say I've spoken to enough people to hear about all these quirks and funny stories. So interesting. And actually that leads to etiquette in a way. We talked about obviously what to wear, obviously not to joke. I think reading the room is a great bit of advice, and also reading the interviewers.
Yeah, and part of it, I say don't joke. I mean, absolutely have a chat and have fun, but don't go in trying to say not joke.
On 2 occasions, I've had a good cop, bad cop experience, and that seems to be very commonplace. Or even better, a good cop and someone who's not even talking, just there to take notes. Do you think that's people testing how you react on the spot, and how would you advise people to prepare for those kind of scenarios in an interview?
Absolutely, I've actually had to do that myself as an interviewer. We had someone who's quite experienced, and so we decided one of us would just be the normal, hey, how are you? Settle them down, chill them out, find out about the person, and then the other person would really push them through their experience until they got to a point where they didn't know the answer.
Got it.
And what we wanted to see was, what do you do when you don't know the answer? And I'll say this person did phenomenally well. Said, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. I will get back to you. No. Total confidence. I'm confident that what I've given you is enough. Any more, I will get back to you. I'll get you any. That person got a job.
Oh, that's great. That's such a good response.
But you're right. Good cop, bad cop. It can be used very effectively. It throws
people, and it's this idea that actually be prepared for the unexpected and actually just staying calm and collected, being able to hold a conversation, being comfortable, and actually the classic, we mentioned this on previous podcast, the Oxbridge line of questions of tell me something even though the question is an impossible question. How do you think when there is no right answer, or when you really just have no idea about this level of technical expertise on an LBO, right? And people will push you to breaking point. And in that scenario, it is just touching on what you do know, keeping it simple and not fluffing.
Exactly. It's just trying to see how you think. So the classic one is, how many ties are going to be sold in the UK this year? For starters, we're talking about the future. So no one knows the answer to it, but just try and work it out. So hang on, there's probably this many adults in the country, maybe 25 million, and maybe the number of working in an office are maybe like 10 million, and probably more men than females are going to wear ties, maybe that's 5 million, and just talk through your process. It doesn't have to be right. Another one was how many golf balls are in the air at the moment. But just start talking. Well, hang on, within 5 miles of my house, I think there's 8 golf courses, and just start talking it through. They're just trying to see how you think. Whereas if you completely freeze, then that is trickier. Mm-hmm. But you can say, hang on, would you mind repeating the question? Give yourself a moment to think.
Yeah.
There's always a way out of it. There's always a way out.
I view it, and actually changing the mentality towards brain teasers as an easy win. And this idea that it's story time. It's time for you to be confident because there's no right answer. And it's for you to take center stage and walk them through your out-of-the-box thinking.
I'll tell you one that I was given myself. I can't actually remember the question, but I worked my way through it. And then the interviewer said, I can actually tell you right now it's completely wrong, so have another go. Whoa. Okay. Well, the assumptions that I could have got wrong must have been, and the idea was just to try and push me until I broke. And it worked really well.
Oh, wow.
All of a sudden, you start thinking out of the box.
Yeah.
I tell you one that I was given myself, and this was, I doubt this would ever happen again. But the interview was going really well, and all of a sudden the interviewer just looked at me straight and went, "Tell me a joke."
Oh, wow.
There's this awful silence, and you're like, what are all the jokes that come to the front of your mind? Like, you definitely can't say them.
Never the good ones.
Never the good ones. So I came up with it was a very kind of silly, I'd say it's like a dad joke, like an accountancy joke. And the interviewer said, "Oh, okay, that's really good, thanks." And we just moved on.
Oh, you managed to navigate that one.
Something came to my head, thank
I've
God.
heard horror stories of tell me a joke, yes. I think the key there is not to say something wrong.
No.
Yes, it's
absolutely.
Just, if you can tick it, great. Otherwise, just take a pass at that question.
I tell you what, a question I got wrong, it taught me an awful lot. So the day before my interview, the budget in the UK had just come out. And so the interviewer said, can you tell me anything about the budget? And I was woefully unprepped, and I absolutely should have been all over this, or at the very least, picked up a newspaper in the morning, read the headlines, and So I had seen at a petrol station the front cover of a red top newspaper, and it was about VAT on female sanitary products. And I was like, good Lord, do I mention this? And so I tried to spin it as a joke, and the interviewer was having absolutely none of it. And so that taught me the value of prep.
Yeah.
Just give yourself a great big huge list of things that you're just going to look up in the days leading up to an interview, and you'll be fine.
Absolutely. The best advice someone gave me with brain teasers is simplify it as much as you can. So, for example, how many tennis balls could you fit in the room?
Oh, yeah.
Rather than start calculating diameters and calculating volumes, none of that. Just take a bucket. How many tennis balls can you fit in a bucket? How big's the bucket? How many can you fit across the width of the room, the height of the room, and then across the room? Exactly. And then nice and simple. So it's just not panicking, simplifying things for brain
exactly.
teasers,
And no one knows the answer.
Exactly. And actually, as we wrap up this podcast and we're talking about all things interviews, finance, applications, what are your final key messages to people thinking about applying to finance and actually those who are going through the application process as we speak?
Okay. So I'm going to touch back on a few things I've already said. But number one, show your enthusiasm for finance. Even if it's not in the degree you're doing, maybe you're doing chemical engineering, show it through something else. Okay. If you can get any work experience at all, preferably in an office and preferably something finance related, fantastic. And then thirdly, try and get yourself some kind of hobby or position of responsibility where you can show off a little bit more of yourself. You don't have to be the captain of the football team. There's only one person who gets to do that. But even being a team member is so much more than doing nothing. So they're my 3 top tips.
Well, look, thank you so much for sharing your top tips. It's great to draw on your insights and just to have a chat over a podcast. And it's unusual not hearing your voice and teaching me an Excel model and actually just getting to know you. But I really appreciate it, as I'm sure our listeners do. So thank you so much for your time, Gerard.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, then hit the follow and subscribe button to keep up to date with our latest episodes. For more content and resources, check out Financial Edge Training's website and social accounts. Financial Edge is trusted to train new hires at top investment banks. Our courses, resources, and tools will help you to succeed in finance.